Good evening and welcome to another live stream event on Rasha Christie South Africa's YouTube channel. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you haven't done so already. My name is Jonathan De Beer and I'm the chapter director at the UKZN in Pietermaritzburg. For those who are tuning in who don't know about Rasha Christie, we are a student apologetics organization, and it's a Latin name meaning the reason for Christ. We work with university and high school students to encourage and strengthen their faith in Christ by helping them understand why they believe in Christianity. And we believe it's vital to engage with pressing questions of worldview, science, history, culture, and philosophy so that the message of the gospel can go out to those who have yet to receive it. And as a ministry, we are dependent on financial support in order to maintain and expand our work. And if you would like to partner with us in this way and are able to donate to this vital work, please go to our website, www.rashachristie.co.za, and click on the donate button. And this evening, we are joined by Don Deal from Florida in the US. And Don is the director of the 12 Points Apologetic System for Norm Geisler International Ministries. He has a master's degree in biblical theological studies from Luther Rice University and a Master of Arts in Christian Apologetics from Southern Evangelical Seminary. He is pursuing a PhD in Islamic Studies with Columbia International University. Don is also a member of the Southern Evangelical Seminary's team, which stands for Truth, Evangelism, and Apologetics Mission. And he's a volunteer apologist with the scientific apologetics ministry, Reasons to Believe. He has taught or lectured in the US, South Africa, the Philippines, Italy, Ukraine, and Singapore. He has contributed to a chapter in the Harvest Handbook of Christian Apologetics and multiple articles in encyclopedias. And tonight he is going to speak to us on Scientology. So welcome, Don. It's great to have you with us.
Well, Jonathan, it's wonderful to be here. I have a great emptiness in my heart when I'm away from South Africa too long, so I'm hoping that the COVID crisis will abate and that soon I can come back with my family. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, it would be great to welcome you in real life in the future sometime. And so Don's going to share a presentation with us, and then we'll go into a time of Q&A. So be sure to post your questions, and I'll field them to Don, and we'll see how many we can answer. So I'll hand over to you, Don.
Okay, thank you very much, Jonathan. And what I'm going to do now is share my PowerPoint screen. And in order to properly present the information, I'm going to have to use the presenter's view, which has my notes on the right side. So for anyone watching immediately, please look at the left side of the screen, which is where the current slide will be. That's the only caveat I have for that. Okay, can you see that, Jonathan?
Yes, yeah, I can see
it's
that.
coming through. I use this as a sort of humorous way to start the presentation. It's a flow chart for choosing your religion. You start at the top where it says start here, and you start off with how many gods do you want to worship? And then if you want none, on the right side of the chart starts off with there's a none, and then below that is are you rich and insane? If you say yes to that, then it gives you the obvious choice. Be a Scientologist. There's other ones over there, and in order to get to be a boring generic Christian, you have to start off with the middle column. Only one. How do you feel about bacon? If you love bacon, then you go to the right. Are you a naturally annoying person? If the answer is no, then you're a boring generic Christian. If you say yes to a natural annoying person, it gives you the choice to go over there. Do you think underwear can be magical? This is not meant to belittle or insult anyone, but I always thought this was a humorous way to separate some of the different religions. So anyway, today we're talking about Scientology. It's been famous for a while. It is for many people's minds the religion of the stars. Many people have heard about this, but unless you've watched a couple of the documentaries or the Leah Remini show on Inside Scientology, you don't know enough, and even with those shows and such, you don't really have the big picture of what's going on. You just have a certain aspect of the religion, such as Going Clear, that documentary, but on that documentary focused on pardon me, focused on the aspect of the religion that deals with what people are commonly think of as brainwashing or mind control. And so it focused on how people, if they believe something sincerely enough, will do the most harmful things to themselves and others. And so that documentary focused on that. But this today, what we're going to do is we're going to look at the overall picture of how the religion started and how the religion developed and what it's all about. I apologize. For some reason I just got a tickle in my throat just now. Okay, so from the beginning, we're going to see how this religion started from L. Ron Hubbard's time, and in the first slide there on the left side of the screen, you'll notice there's many famous celebrities there. Some people may notice Jerry Seinfeld there. He took a few courses years ago, but he never actually became a Scientologist. And the musician Beck on the bottom left, most of these people are very devout Scientologists. Some have left since, but most are very devout. So here's our outline. We're going to talk about L. Ron Hubbard, the founder. Excuse me again. The development of Dianetics, Scientology's history, Scientology's doctrines, some controversies, some resources you can use to learn more, and then we'll close with that. There's Tom Cruise. He's perhaps the most famous Scientologist in the world. There's been at least one person who called him the #2 person in all of Scientology. The head of Scientology currently is a gentleman named David Miscavige. But the fame of Tom Cruise has brought in a lot of interest to the religion and caused a lot of people to want to find out more. And this is something I'm going to quote what he said on the Today Show here in the U.S. to the host, Matt Lauer. Tom Cruise said, "Scientology is something that you don't understand. It's like you could be a Christian and still be a Scientologist." So we're going to examine that claim a little bit along with the history and such we're going through today. LRH, that's L. Ron Hubbard, the writer. There he is looking very cool. This is 1940s. He's got those very sharp sunglasses. I've often considered getting a pair of those for myself. After dropping out of George Washington University in Washington, D.C., he had failing grades in all his science subjects, but he did pass writing and rhetoric. He took up writing to earn a living. And during his writing career, which lasted well into the founding of the religion, up till around 1982 or so, he wrote more than 250 works of fiction, science fiction, Westerners, adventure stories, you name it. He was one of the big sellers during the pulp fiction phase. Pulp fiction refers to the material the books were made out of. They were printed cheaply, so they were printed out of recycled paper. They had kind of a yellowish color to them. And he was a master of inexpensively printed and inexpensively made books. He was incredibly productive when he was in his creative phase. He actually reached the point in the early 1950s where he had one of the first electric typewriters available. In order to keep up with his pace of writing, he actually used butcher paper, a long roll. Instead of the old typewriter putting one sheet at a time in, he could continuously roll and continuously type for hours on end. And a couple of his ex-wives have mentioned, and some of his people who no longer cared for him mentioned that they were convinced that he was manic depressive because he would go into long periods of complete depression and get nothing done and want to be by himself and stay away from everybody. And then he would have brief periods of incredibly productive writing and such. So he was troubled throughout his life with these periods. He likes to, in the Church of Scientology under the L. Ron Hubbard website, likes to tout him as a war hero. They said he was the first casualty of World War II in the Pacific. And they said he left the war with severe injuries, crippled and blinded by a shell that exploded on the deck of the boat. And they say he ended up with 21 medals and palms. He handled the injuries through Dianetics. That is, after the war in convalescence, that he used the teachings of Dianetics, which we'll get to shortly, his understanding, his development of this mind science to completely heal his body and mind. Now, service records were made available by the U.S. Freedom of Information Act show that it was not quite that case. He was never wounded in battle. He was not the first casualty. He had ulcers and conjunctivitis. That is, his medical condition when he was trying to get disability payments from the government were ulcers from stress and conjunctivitis, pink eye. He had a standard 4 medals that everyone got for being in the military, plus expert rifle and pistol shot. He did grow up in the western part of the U.S. and did grow up around guns, so he was a good shot. However, he exaggerated his entire military career. The biggest story from his military time was when he was in charge of a anti-submarine craft and announced off the coast of Washington in the U.S. and announced that they were being attacked by Japanese submarines, and proceeded to launch all his depth charges and call in other boats to help. It turned out that there was nothing there. He just blew up a bunch of water. Later, he decided to take his ship and get some shooting practice on an abandoned island and down south on the west coast of the U.S. Turned out the island was owned by Mexico, and even during wartime, you're not supposed to randomly shoot other people's countries. So he was relieved of command after that. If you look at his record, he actually was much more of a con man than a successful officer. He was moved from command to command. He never stayed very long. Inevitably, he would come up with some story along the lines of, I'm here on a secret mission from so-and-so in naval intelligence, and I can't be bothered with day-to-day duties. And he would just kind of slack off. He was not a naval hero. After the war, that's a nice picture. That's actually Aleister Crowley, who founded the Church of Satan. From 1945, L. Ron Hubbard, after the war, moved in with John Parsons, who was he was actually a rocket scientist who was into spiritual things such as Aleister Crowley's Ordo Templi Orientis, which is a branch of the Church of Satan. Hubbard was an active member in the group for several months and met his first wife there. I'm sorry, his second wife there. His first wife he married before the war, and he actually had 2 wives at the same time for a while. Now, the Church of Scientology at first denied he was ever any part of this group, but later they changed the story and said that he was sent there to infiltrate the Church of Satan in order to break it up. There's no record of that in any law enforcement or military organization. And so while he was there, he learned certain ideas that from Aleister Crowley's religion. The religion, Aleister Crowley's religion, taught that if you want to trace the source of your problems, you go back to your childhood. And that's what Scientology says and Dianetics says. Aleister Crowley says psychiatry is bad. Well, Scientology actually has several offshoot groups that are formally linked to the church whose purpose is to try to eliminate all psychiatry on earth. So they're both groups are against psychiatry. Both the Church of Satan and Scientology say that your spirit can leave your body at your will if you just learn how to control your spirit. And both the Church of Satan and Scientology say that through certain training, you can gain supernatural powers. And it was also during this time that L. Ron Hubbard wrote his Affirmations, which was entered into a court case and was admitted to be his, in which he talks about a red-headed goddess that he tries to control, but she tries to control him during his magic ceremonies and such. And it reveals a very, very troubled mind. You can find a copy of that online somewhere. It's very revealing and very disturbing. May of 1950, this is it. The Astounding Science Fiction is a magazine. There are several of these magazines very popular at the time. This one was John Campbell was the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, a friend of L. Ron Hubbard's. He liked Hubbard because Hubbard could spin a tale. He could tell a story at dinner, and he could write a book or write an article or write a chapter in no time. If you look at the bottom of that picture there, it says Dianetics, a New Science of the Mind. So it was in this science fiction magazine that Hubbard's book Dianetics was first announced. And what is Dianetics? There it is. It's interesting. If anybody's been around long enough and they've seen Scientology commercials in the past, they almost always featured a volcano. And that's because L. Ron Hubbard said that it would jog your memories of your past lives when your brains were implanted with the false religions and such, and make you want to go to Scientology to clear out the rest of these false memories. So Dianetics, what L. Ron Hubbard did, he pieced together hypnotic techniques, some Freudian theories, some Buddhist concepts, and elements of other philosophies and practices. He came up with the book Dianetics, subtitle Modern Science of the Mind. The Modern Science of Mental Health. Now, the American Psychological Association criticized Hubbard's claims, as if you read the book, and you can find PDF copies online if you don't want to spend money. The book says page after page is written in a pseudo-scientific terminology that if you've never read actual science, could fool you into thinking it sounds like science. In other words, L. Ron Hubbard being a fiction writer, it's as though he was writing in the voice of one of his fictional doctors. He uses a lot of medical terminology, but not always correctly. And again, the page will say things such as, studies inevitably show that this happens during Dianetics, or the cure inevitably comes about because this happens during Dianetics. And the only problem is there's not a single footnote in the entire book for studies. There is no science. He told a friend of his that he wrote the entire book in 1 month with his muse, that redheaded lady, guiding him to write the book. There was no studies on which Dianetics was based. It was simply L. Ron Hubbard combining ideas together and writing it, as I said before, in a pseudo-scientific manner. Anybody with a science background would recognize the nonsense as soon as they started reading it. The American Psychological Association criticized his claims in the books, and they said, and this is a quote, "not supported by empirical evidence." And Scientific American magazine said Hubbard's book, and this is one of my favorite quotes, Scientific American said that Hubbard's book contained more promises and less evidence per page than any publication since the invention of printing. That's pretty bad. So genius, the Scientologists believe he was a genius. In Dianetic practice, the patient, working with a partner called an auditor, that is a listener, recalls past painful experiences in reverse chronological sequence. Starting from current times, you say you have a pain in your elbow that recurs, and they'll say, when's the last time that it happened? And you say, well, last Saturday, my elbow was really hurting. And then they'll say, well, what else was happening at the same time? What were you doing? What were you smelling, hearing? Where were you at? And they try to isolate certain aspects of the memory that key the pain. And then once you figure that part out, they say, okay, when was the next earliest memory of the pain, next earliest, and you try to go back to the origin of where the pain comes from. And perhaps when you were a child, you were riding your bicycle, someone honked a horn and you crashed and broke your arm. And so every time you hear a car horn, according to this theory, your elbow begins to feel pain again as a memory. And so you work in reverse chronological sequence in Dianetics, supposedly erasing negative effects and attaining a state called clear and allegedly free from all ills. John Campbell, the editor of Astounding Science Fiction, said he cured his asthma. The auditor carefully records any intimate revelations in Scientology now, including sexual or criminal activities and marital or family troubles, and they record these and they keep these in files. So if you become a Scientologist, you will be going back to all the most painful and embarrassing memories of your life. Someone will write it down, and it will be available for reference should you decide to cause trouble for the religion later. There's quite a bit of rumors about why certain celebrities don't leave the religion because of all the information recorded in the Scientology vaults on their problems and their any kind of sexual problems, particularly they love to record. So 1950 Dianetics came out, and what happened was L. Ron Hubbard, it became a craze in the U.S. because now you didn't need a professional psychologist to work through your problems. All you needed was the book and another friend to help you go through your list of problems, and together you and your friends could solve all your problems, all your illnesses, mental hangups, physical illnesses, everything, according to the claims of the book. And almost immediately after, Dianetic centers began to pop up. These were theoretically medical centers that would help people to find someone who could help them to do Dianetics. And by the way, the word Dianetics means through the soul or spirit. And so you would go to these Dianetic centers and meet with an auditor who would then take you through the steps of the book and help cure all your problems. Well, that craze lasted just a couple of years before it began crashing in a major way. It went bankrupt in 3 years. And L. Ron Hubbard sold Dianetics to an oil man from Oklahoma when it became, and of course that guy did not realize that it was worth nothing at that point. The whole chain was collapsing. So how do you get past all these economic problems? Well, if you're starting a self-help or a medical center, then you have to pay taxes on your income. If you're the head of a religion, it's a different story. So it's almost as soon as Dianetics ended, 1953, the Church of Scientology, and these are all the names he incorporated, the Church of Scientology, Church of American Science, and Church of Spiritual Engineering incorporated in Elizabeth, New Jersey. And he said it's because as he was doing the processing of people and taking them back to the earliest memories, more and more people recalled past lives, and he realized that your spirit is eternal, which he didn't want to be confused with other religions, so he calls the spirit the Thetan or Thetan, depending on which time you hear him. Well, auditors repeatedly asking patients in a trance state to recall earlier similar incidents, taken back until you get back to the origin of the problem. Then the book, one of his books called Science of Survival, contains that. During this time, when he was doing the Dianetics, Hubbard became curious if there was some physical way to test what people were telling him. Were the people telling him things just to make him happy or get a reaction from him, or were they telling the truth? So he began to examine lie detectors and such and see how those work. So he became interested in a type of lie detector called an electropsychometer. And it's a device where you hold two metal cans, one in each hand, with a wire connected to a meter. And as you speak, if you're feeling stress emotionally, the electrical current running through the cans will cause the meter to jump. And the more stress you feel, the more perspiration the more tension in your muscles will all register on the meter. And so they get an idea, even if you're not telling the auditor some problem, they get an idea when there's a problem, because that E-meter, as they call it for short, begins to jump. They know that you're not telling them something. Well, that same E-meter is used for people who, once they become part of Scientology, to get them to confess crimes such as having negative thoughts about L. Ron Hubbard. You can see where this problem leads. He began calling patients pre-clears in the Scientology world. And within 6 weeks, he had created a new subject, apparently out of thin air. Hubbard called his new subject Scientology. He introduced it, claimed to have discovered the human soul. He claimed to be the first person ever to be able to prove the human soul through these e-meters with these electrical. They're basically galvanometers. They measure skin resistance as you get stressed. You, as I said before, either you perspire, or the tension in your muscles goes up, then the conductivity between the two cans going through your body to form a circuit increases or decreases, causing the needle to jump. He called the Scientology, he said, Hubbard said at this time, involves freeing souls called thetans, as I said. And the problem is that we think we're our bodies, according to Hubbard, but we're really these spirits kind of trapped in these bodies, and that we've lived a lot longer than you might imagine. 1954, the Church of Scientology is incorporated in California and Arizona, and that's where the first actual buildings were. He just incorporated the name in New Jersey just because he was kind of cover his legal bases. He discovered from the collapse of Dianetics that he needed to have several outs. And to this day, the Church of Scientology is divided into about 30 interrelated divisions, all of which are legally separate from each other, so that if any one group gets sued, the indemnity is limited on all the others. He was very savvy when it came to legal systems. So what happens when you walk into a Scientology center? Well, they give you a test called the Oxford Capacity Analysis. It has nothing to do with Oxford University. L. Ron Hubbard and one of his followers, while he was living in England, invented the test. It has no ability to determine any sort of mental problems. It simply asked questions that were interesting to Hubbard. A proper psychological evaluation in test form will ask the same question different ways, and will move the multiple choice answers A, B, C, or D. Will move it so that you don't just randomly pick things, and it will determine based on your results where your stressors or where your problems lie. In the 1960s in England, the government was worried about this new Church of Scientology, so they sent psychologists and psychiatrists to evaluate the Oxford Capacity Analysis, and the psychologists and psychiatrists reported back that it's completely useless, that it does nothing. One psychiatrist went in and of the A, B, or C, or D answers, chose A for all 200 questions. And when he finished, he turned it in, and it should have come back as a bad test, and the person grading it should have realized it was a mistake. Instead, they gave him a list of courses he needed to take. Another psychiatrist simply randomly picked A, B, C, or D without even reading the questions and turned it in, which once again should have come back as a bad test if it was a proper analysis tool, but it was not, and therefore they just gave him the list of classes they want to take that he needed to take to improve his condition. So the Oxford Capacity Analysis has nothing to do with Oxford and has no ability to actually determine any mental problems. However, it's a great way to get people to talk about their problems. And so Hubbard, his phrase for it was find the ruin. That is, find out why the person's there. A person does not go into a Scientology center because their life is going great. People typically would go in there because their life has gone off the rails. They're not where they want to be. Something's wrong. Either they're not doing well in school, not doing well in relationships, not doing well at work, but whatever it is, it's just their life is not going well, and they go into Church of Scientology hoping to get an answer that they can use. So L. Ron Hubbard's phrase for that was find the ruin. And the phrase find the ruin means find out what's bothering that person. And so when you start off, you take the Oxford Capacity Analysis and you talk to the person giving the test, and they find out what your weak point is, and they'll start harping on that. And it does not matter what your problem is. You will be recommended to take their first course they'll say you need to take is a communications course. Let's say you have a problem in relationships. Well, it's because you don't communicate well. Let's say you're not doing well in school. Well, that's because you don't communicate well. If you communicated well, you would understand the questions and the material you're reading better, and you would have better grades. You're not doing well at work, it's because you don't communicate well. And so, no matter what you do on that test, you will need to take the communications course. During the communications course, you go in wanting to get better at communicating, and you'll go into a room with another person, and they'll give you orders, and they'll say something along the lines of, tell the table to turn over. And you'll be confused, and the guy will say again, tell the table to turn over, and you'll say, turn over table. And he'll say, fail. Do it again. Turn over table. Fail, do again, and he will continue to harp on you until you do it with a conviction and strength and intensity that he considers passing. And theoretically, you're learning to communicate. What you're actually learning to do is to obey orders from somebody at Scientology. Everything they say, you have to learn to respond without question to in order to pass the communications course. When you complete the communications course to their satisfaction, you're not given a certificate that says, Don Deal has passed the communications course. You're giving a certificate that says, Don Deal is a Hubbard apprentice Scientologist. So during that time, while you're in that class, you'll have other Scientologists walking by saying, which class are you taking? Oh, the communication? Oh, that's a good one. The next one's even better. And they'll do what they call in cult studies, love bombing you. You'll have constant affirmations from the people in Scientology about how great it is that you're there and how wonderful everything is. And they will do a couple of things. Number one, they'll make you feel like you're part of their group, which is why you get that apprentice Scientologist certificate. And number two, they're going to introduce you to an incredible lexicon, an incredible new vocabulary of terms that nobody else on the earth uses. Why? Because then you can't communicate with anyone who's not a Scientologist. A further way to separate you from the rest of reality and to get you caught up into the world of Scientology. It's basic mind control. And strangely enough, L. Ron Hubbard wrote a book on mind control back in the 50s that he tried to sell to the FBI and the CIA. So that's how they get in. So what do they teach? Well, Scientology is comprised exclusively of the teachings of one man, Lafayette Ronald Hubbard, usually called L. Ron. Hubbard's theories, assumptions, and techniques for practical applications that make up the rituals of Scientology are sometimes called the spiritual technology, or they'll just say the tech. You got to have the tech. What do they teach? Hubbard claimed to have discovered certain natural laws of the spiritual universe. He said, if once you know these laws of the spiritual universe, you can predict and control behavior and phenomena in a manner similar to the way in which the natural laws codified in the physical sciences can be used to predict and control phenomena in the physical world. So you learn to control people, and you will spend a lot of time in that communication course and other courses learning to identify what emotional state your interlocutor, the person you're speaking with, is at, so that you'll know what tools to use to manipulate them. Scientology assumes that spirituality and thought, called theta, hence thetans for who we really are, is an energy existing in its own universe, separate and distinct from the physical universe of matter, energy, space, and time, which they call the MEST universe. You'll hear them say that a lot. So thought, who sometimes refers to thought as energy, sometimes as mass. He tried to make it sound scientific. Spirit, theta, is senior to and indeed created the physical universe, MEST, the matter, energy, space, time universe. That is, our spirits collectively agreed to and created this universe as an agreement of all of our minds together, which we collectively are God. Each individual person, that is the spirit inside them, called a thetan, is considered to be a thought unit of the spiritual universe, which interacts with the physical universe, usually by inhabiting a human body. Okay, the thetan itself is defined in Scientology as the source of life. In the individual, it's recognized as the core of personality or essence of oneself, which is distinct and separate from the physical body or the brain. For the Scientologists, the body is just a physical thing that your thetan uses to interact with the world, and the interaction between the spirit, the thetan, and the body is via the brain. So for the Scientologists, the brain is a switchboard between the communication center between the spirit world and the physical world. Scientology proposes that in its native state, the spirit slash thetan is immortal and godlike and possesses the potentiality of knowing everything. That in the present time, its true capacities and capabilities have been lost and forgotten. So, how do they see reality? They divide it up this way. There's 8 dynamics. You start with yourself there in the center. You're the first dynamic. Second dynamic is your family. The third dynamic is the group you belong to. The fourth dynamic is the species you belong to. Fifth dynamic is every life form. The sixth dynamic is the physical universe. The seventh dynamic is the spirits. And the eighth dynamic is symbolized, as you see in the upper right-hand side of the picture, the symbol infinity, which represents God. We are trying to get back to that. The purpose of Scientology is to regain your godlike powers. And this is a tone scale, which is how they measure where you are on in your existence. At the very top, this is just page 1 of it. So this is the lower half of the scale. You start off with total failure at the very bottom. And what you do is, based on these various tone scales, tone being emotional states, you can see where you're at. And so you start from the bottom is -40. It's total failure. You go above that. -30 is can't hide. -20 is being. I even laugh when I read it. It's so silly. Being nothing is -20. Being objects is 10. Hiding is -8. Worshipping bodies, as you go up the scale, controlling bodies, regret, blame is -1. -0.7 is accountable. I'm not sure why. Pity's -0.1. Failures -0.01. Dying is actually above that. Apathy is 0.05. Undeserving is 0.3. There's no logical basis to the scale. And here's the second part, the upper half of the scale. And as you see it goes from sympathy, propitiation. Sympathy goes above that. No sympathy is above sympathy, by the way. You notice that. Anger is above anxiety, fear, despair, and sympathy. You get up to mild interest, conservatism, strong interest. Exhilaration is 8. And if you notice that line out to the left, that is when you're in the body. The highest level you can reach is exhilaration. If you ever saw Tom Cruise being interviewed by Oprah Winfrey when he first met Katy Perry, not Katy Perry, but Katie Holmes, when Oprah asked him about how he felt about her, Tom started jumping up and down on the couch and was acting like a madman. He was just so excited and so happy about having met Katie Holmes and their relationship. He just jumped up and down. Well, most people on Earth saw that and thought Tom's maybe crazy or a little bit off his rocker. Scientologists, using this tone scale, said exhilaration is the highest level of Scientology achievement while you're still in your body. That is, while everybody else was saying, that guy seems crazy, Scientologists all said, that's what I want to be, as strange as that sound. And above exhilaration is action, games, then postulates, then serenity of beingness, which is you're at the very top now. You're down. And he said, how do you deal with them? He said, any person from 2.0 down on the tone scale should not have, in any thinking society, any civil rights of any kind, because by abusing those rights, they bring into being arduous and strenuous laws which are oppressive to those who need no such restraints. In other words, he thought he was above laws because laws were created by people who were low on the tone scale. And that's the actual Bridge to Total Freedom there. You can find that on their website, download it. It's huge. You start from the bottom and work your way up. On the right side of the scale is, you'll see the word clear in large letters on the right side of the scale. That's the basic level of, that's where Dianetics can take you. You do all the training on the right side, plus the training on the left side and auditing or processing on the right side, and you can make it up to the level clear. That's US wise about $40,000 US to reach that level. At that point, all you've done is cleared out your problems from this life. Above that, you got to clear out the problems of your past lives and move on up the scale to begin to expand your powers. At operating Thetan, which is OT above that, levels 3 or 4, I forget which one. 3 is called the Wall of Fire. That's where you find out about the evil galactic overlord Xenu and how he messed up everything in the galaxy. But you get up to OT level 4, and by the way, Tom Cruise is at least level 7. OT level 4, operating Thetan level 4, you can leave your body at any time you want and take over other people's bodies if you want. It's an incredible ability. And there's Xenu. I mentioned him. And this is from the South Park cartoon that made fun of Scientology. That's their representation of Xenu. This is not an actual photo. And here's the story, and this is straight from L. Ron Hubbard's handwritten notes. 75 million years ago, Xenu headed the Galactic Federation, which was an organization of 76 planets that had already existed for 20 million years. The planets were suffering a tremendous problem with overpopulation. Xenu's draconian solution to the matter was to gather a large number of people, kill them, freeze their thetans, their souls, and transport the frozen thetans to Earth, which the planet Earth, which back then they called Tegiak. And they put them on spaceships that looked just like DC-8s, which was a current jet airliner when L. Ron Hubbard was writing this stuff. And there they are, all flying them all to Earth. Well, the thetans, the frozen thetans, were left in the vicinity of volcanoes. Remember earlier I mentioned volcanoes, which in turn those volcanoes were destroyed. So basically he put all the frozen thetans around the volcanoes, around the ring of fire around the Earth, dropped A-bombs, atomic bombs on them, blew up all those thetans, which were now released spirits floating about, complete confusion, don't know where they're at, don't know what's going on. But Xenu's not dumb. You don't get to be the galactic overlord by being dumb. So before he dropped the bombs on those frozen alien spirits, he put satellites in the orbit around Tegiak, Earth, and in those satellites were multiplex movie theaters. And so when the spirits were blown up and lost and had no idea what's going on, one minute they're at their desk on the planet whatever, and now they suddenly wake up and they're floating around in a nuclear explosion. Well, these magnetic ribbon collecting satellites gathered in all those spirits and programmed them with the world religions. And there you have it. That's where Christianity comes from, according to L. Ron. And that's the same story I just got through telling you where they blew up. Okay, Controversies. Suppressive Person, Fair Game, Operation Snow White, Operation Freakout, and Disconnection. We're going to talk about each of these briefly. We doing okay on time, Jonathan? Okay. Symbols and recommendations. Wait, yeah. Suppressive Person. According to Hubbard, a person who possesses a distinct set of characteristics and mental attitudes that cause him to suppress other people in his vicinity. This is not a good person to be. This is the person whose behavior is calculated to be disastrous, also called antisocial personality. According to Hubbard, 2.5% of the population is completely insane and bent on the destruction of other people, as well as Scientology. If Scientology is able to clear the planet, which is their goal, suppressive persons, they just usually abbreviate as SPs, he said, will be disposed of quietly and without sorrow. So basically in Scientology, there's 3 kinds of non-Scientologists. There's pre-clears, which is what most people are. You haven't been cleared yet. You haven't gone through training, so you haven't reached the any level of Scientology. That's a normal person. There's potential trouble sources. Those are people with negative attitudes that can hold back a Scientologist, so if they don't hang around them at all. So if your friend goes into Scientology and you start asking challenging questions, they need to get rid of you because you're a potential trouble source. And then there's suppressive persons who are out to damage Scientology. And he had a policy about how to handle suppressive persons called fair game. SP is Suppressive Person Order, fair game. This is a quote. May be deprived of property or injured by any means by any Scientologist without any discipline of the Scientologist. May be tricked, sued, or lied to, or destroyed. The 1970s, when this official policy of Hubbard's came to light, it caused a lot of negative press. So L. Ron Hubbard put out a new directive that said, don't say fair game anymore. He didn't get rid of the practices. He got rid of the term fair game because everyone knew about it. Has it been put to use? Absolutely. Scientology had planted spies in the Internal Revenue Service and the Justice Department of the U.S. because L. Ron Hubbard was paranoid and convinced they were spying on him. So he had his members get jobs there to get documents. They had planted bugging devices and stolen many confidential documents and plans. And what happened was a criminal plot was uncovered by the Internal Revenue Service. An FBI agent just happened to see a secretary in the wrong place hanging around wrong after normal hours at a copying machine and got suspicious and began to trail her and realized what she was doing was stealing government documents. So he got an official investigation started. In 1977, the FBI raided Federal Bureau of Investigation in the U.S. raided Scientology headquarters. 11 of the church leaders, including Mary Sue Hubbard, L. Ron Hubbard's wife, were convicted of conspiracy and burglary and went to prison. Now, L. Ron Hubbard, as I said before, he was smart legally, so he had officially distanced himself from the religion starting in the late 1960s. He still ran it. He still got all the profits, but there was no official documentation showing that he was part of the religion. He used couriers and stuff. It was kind of like bin Laden with Al-Qaeda. He kept himself isolated, but he's still profiting from it. Well, when they raided the documents of Scientology, they discovered something else. These records demonstrated the church had, for the previous 8 years, this is the quote, perpetrated a conspiracy involving manufacturing and falsifying records to present to the IRS, that is for tax purposes. They burglarized IRS offices, stole government documents, and subverted government processes for unlawful purposes. At the same raid, the FBI procured documentation, and I'm going to skip over this real quick, show you her. This is Paulette Cooper. She was a freelance writer in the starting 1960s. She got curious and wrote a book she researched about Scientology. And it was a negative book. It was an expose of Scientology. And L. Ron Hubbard put her on the enemies list. And as a suppressive person, she was to be destroyed. They literally put people into her apartments and everywhere she went to try to befriend her so they could get into her apartment and steal stuff from her, including stealing papers. She was a writer, papers she had touched and had fingerprints on, which they then put bomb threats to Middle Eastern countries and sent to their embassies in New York, since she lived in New York and she was Jewish. And so they had her, she was in court being tried, and the evidence was overwhelmingly against her. They had women dress up like her and be seen making threats in public, tried to copy her voice, her look, everything. They had her best friend turned out to be an undercover Scientologist who was stealing information they could use against her. They were going to destroy her. So let me get back to that previous slide. The operation of the Guardian Office, now called the Office of Special Affairs, called Operation Freakout. It was directed by Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue. So this lady, until that FBI raid, this lady wrote a book called The Scandal of Scientology. and they had her life. She was on her way to prison before the FBI raid discovered just how incredibly complex this was. Scientology ended up having to pay her a good deal of money and promised to leave her alone, and they did not, because Hubbard, until the day he died, which was about 8 years after this, 9 years after this, he hated her, and so he didn't care about whatever court agreements they had. There's actually a book written about this lady. The name of the new book escapes me offhand, but I've read it. It's fascinating how far they would go and how many hundreds of people they had involved just to destroy this woman's life. And she still psychologically suffers because of that continuous harassment they gave her. Disconnection is the policy that gets the most news these days. And that's Hubbard Communication Office Bulletin of 1983, 10 September, called PTSness and Disconnection. As I mentioned, a PTS is a potential trouble source. And if somebody in your family becomes a potential trouble source, they're going to interfere with your improvement in Scientology, how they view it. L. Ron Hubbard probably viewed it as interfering with his income source. But you would disconnect from them. That is, you would have nothing to do with them ever again. A Scientologist can become a potential trouble source by reason of being connected to someone that is antagonistic to Scientology or its tenets. In order to resolve the PTS condition, he either handles the other person's antagonism, as covered in the materials on PTS handling, or as a last resort, when all attempts to handle have failed, he disconnects from the person. That is, if you're a Scientologist and you got somebody causing you irritation in your family, if it's your wife, husband, mother, children, whatever it is, break away completely. Nothing to do with them. No answering the phone. No nothing. Completely break away. If your children do that, they're going to have to go live with somebody else in the family, because you can't have anything interfere with clearing the planet and reaching your own potential. And that's what Leah Remini, the actress who was a lifetime Scientologist who left, her television show focused on disconnection and other destructive policies of the church. This is what the Scientologist church says. A person is simply exercising his right to communicate or not to communicate with a particular person. With our tech of handle or disconnect, and tech, spiritual technology, handle means to control, or disconnect, we are, in fact, doing nothing different than any society or group or marriage down through thousands of years. They actually cause divorces just to get the person to stay in Scientology. Now, this is the part where Christians, when Tom Cruise said you could be a Scientologist and a Christian, he doesn't know everything about the religion. So these are actual quotes from L. Ron Hubbard during his lectures. These are not in books. In the past, WikiLeaks used to have a lot of Scientology material available. You could download. You could get the audio tapes, recordings of L. Ron Hubbard's teaching, in which he talks about the alien civilizations and all the strange stuff that they deny on television and in public, but he actually taught. You can actually listen to the recordings. And this is a quote from L. Ron. He said, "For those of you whose Christian toes I may have stepped on, let me take the opportunity to disabuse you of some lovely myths. For instance, the historic Jesus was not nearly the sainted figure he's been made out to be. In addition to being a lover of young boys and men, he was given to uncontrollable bursts of temper and hatred. You have only to look at the history of his teachings inspired to see where it all inevitably leads." And he would of course talk about the Crusades and the Spanish Inquisition. That he says there, Jesus was a raging pedophile. On the Antichrist, and listen to this. He said, "No doubt you are familiar with the Revelations section of the Bible where various events are predicted. Also mentioned is a brief period of time in which the archenemy of Christ, referred to as the Antichrist, will reign and his opinions will have sway. This Antichrist represents the forces of Lucifer, literally the light bearer or light bringer. Lucifer being a mythical representation of the forces of enlightenment. My mission could be said to fulfill the biblical promise represented by this brief Antichrist period." He's calling himself the Antichrist. Now, this is symbology. That's the Scientology Cross. That's what's on their churches and everything. You notice it's a traditional Christian cross, but with an additional 4 lines through it. It's basically an X'd out Christian cross. Now, he didn't invent this symbol. There it is on the left side. That's from the Church of Satan on the left side. You can see where he copied it. It wasn't original. Okay, so if you're curious to know more about this, I'm sorry, this is L. Ron Hubbard. I'm sorry. L. Ron Hubbard, during his lectures, recommended, this is during his Philadelphia doctorate lectures in 1952, he discussed occult magic of the Middle Ages, and he recommended a current book. He said, it's a fascinating work in itself, and that's works written by Aleister Crowley, the late Aleister Crowley, my very good friend. Aleister Crowley, the head of the Church of Satan, he called his very good friend. This is the person that L. Ron Hubbard, the Scientologists currently claim Hubbard was going undercover with. L. Ron Hubbard copied a lot of his spiritual things from the Aleister Crowley's Church of Satan. Now, you may be thinking, that's a lot of stuff, Don. It can't get any stranger. You would be wrong. Let's get stranger. The Nation of Islam, not Muslims and Islam, but the Nation of Islam is an American cult started by Louis Farrakhan. Run by Louis Farrakhan now. They teach that black people are gods and that white people are the devil. That's literally part of their teachings. He has now directed all of his ministers, Louis Farrakhan has, to reach the level of clear in Scientology. That is, the Church, Nation of Islam, which teaches that God is a black man in a spaceship, has now joined forces with the Church of Scientology, which teaches that our problems are caused by aliens in spaceships coming to Earth. They're now partners. Remember this? Tom Cruise said, Scientology is something that you don't understand. It's like you could be a Christian and still be a Scientologist. I think at this point we realize just how false that is. Websites, here's a couple of them. Some of these may be out of date. I haven't been to the CMU website yet. There's a professor there that ran a lot of the information there. And Operation Clambake. These days, there's a lot of websites. Back then, people were, when I first started this in 2008, a lot of people were still very afraid of taking on Scientology because they will sue you out of existence for criticism. And so these websites were some of the earliest ones. Nowadays, if you look for information critical of Scientology, there's lots of it, and there's lots of books now. In the beginning, there was very few. Here's one for Christians, The Challenge of the Cults and New Religions by Ron Rhodes. It has a whole chapter on Scientology. And that whole chapter, I asked him about the legal disclaimer in front of the chapter on Scientology. And he said the publisher's lawyers put that in there. Of all the religions that's criticized and examined in that book, only Scientology has a legal disclaimer in front of it. Lawrence Wright wrote the book and now a documentary made from it called Scientology Going Clear, Scientology, Hollywood and the Prison of Belief, where he talks about the connection between Hollywood and Scientology. And this is an excellent book by John Atack, A Piece of Blue Sky. L. Ron Hubbard said to one of his followers one day, let's go sell them a piece of blue sky. In other words, what was going on. Scientology, Dianetics, and L. Ron Hubbard exposed. L. Ron Hubbard said he was a war hero, and John Atack was a devout Scientologist who worked closely with L. Ron Hubbard and wanted to write the definitive story of L. Ron Hubbard. And L. Ron Hubbard gave him permission to contact the government to get a copy of his service record. And so he wanted all the medals that L. Ron had earned, which were no longer around L. Ron. He wanted to get all those medals to put in a display to show everybody what a great war hero L. Ron Hubbard was. He believed all of it. He began to do the research, and L. Ron gave him access to all his records, and he discovered that L. Ron Hubbard was a con artist and that he had lied about the majority of his history. So using the sources only available from L. Ron Hubbard himself, plus the other sources that he did independent research, John Atack didn't just write the definitive book on L. Ron Hubbard. He escaped the religion, left the religion, and wrote the book exposing the religion. And you might imagine he's been harassed continuously, basically since then. All right, that is the end of the show. And I'm pretty sure there are not and could not be any questions because it's so clearly explained. What do you think, Jonathan? Pretty maybe a little different than you expected?
Yeah, some of the stuff I'd heard before, but wow, that was just amazing. Very, very enlightening. Thank you for the presentation and the research that has gone into that. I actually myself was writing down a lot of questions while you were talking.
Oh, sure. I originally took a course on cults and new religions with Ron Rhodes when I was getting my master's in apologetics, and we had to research a group, and so I chose Scientology just because I'd heard about it in the news and was curious. And I began to get books, and I have quite a library now of books about and by Scientologists. I didn't want them to get any of my money, so I found them on eBay. And somebody who had purchased the books to get somebody off their back at the office put them up for about $1 a piece, which is cheaper than the U.S. price of about $60 a book if you buy them from Scientology. So I bought a bunch of their books that way, $12 for 12 books, and just began my research and combined that with the few books available then written by ex-Scientologists. Really opened my eyes to the abuses that go on in that religion. I mean, sure. It's frightening.
So I went on to the local website of Scientology in South Africa, and they made a couple of interesting statements when I was reading through what they're all about and whatever. One of them you've kind of touched on, but maybe it says that Scientology is something one does, not something one believes. So what exactly do they mean by this?
Well, they say a lot of things that don't make sense. L. Ron Hubbard said truth is relative to your condition, your situation, and to truth. So if L. Ron Hubbard says truth is relative to truth, you realize that in general terms, he was creative but not consistent in his use of terminology. And so it's really hard to understand what they're saying. So if you don't mind reading that one more time to me, and I'll see if I can parse out what they were trying to get at.
It says Scientology is something one does, not something one believes in.
Right. So I think what they're trying to say is as you apply it, you see the truth of it.
Okay.
That you learn how to control your emotions. You learn how to control other people. You see, oh, this is working. And I don't have to just believe it. I see it. That's what they're trying to say. Come learn. And of course, we know the spiral of how that works out. At least I've seen way too many testimonies about that spiral.
Thanks. And then the second interesting statement they made was Scientologists actively use the insights and knowledge that Scientology gives them to make a real positive difference in the lives of others. So my question was then, what difference do they want to make in other people's lives?
The Scientologists themselves believe that they're the only chance for sanity on Earth, that we're all caught up in the illusions brought to us either from that programming through the satellites by Xenu or by our own life problems or our own past life issues, that we're all caught up in those. And the only way that this world has a chance at sanity and survival which are the two things they really stress, are through application of Scientology. Everyone needs to become a Scientologist and the world will flower afterwards.
Okay, sure. I've got a few more, but let me go to some of the listeners' questions, and then we can, if we have some time, maybe I can ask one or two of my
Sure,
own.
sure.
So here's a question. It says, if there is brainwashing being used, as you referred to, how does one help someone in that state? Because if you try and help, you will be marked and avoided.
That's a fact. It's really, really difficult. Generally speaking, anyone caught up in a cult, if you use direct information and direct kind of aggressive tactics of trying to demonstrate to them what's wrong with what they're doing, when they can't handle your questions, they mentally put up a hand and block, and they think to themselves, that person's attacking, I can't answer that question, but the smart people in my religion can handle that. I'll just put aside my doubt and just block that person and let the smart people handle that question. That's above my pay grade. And so if you do it a direct, here's evidence, you're going to get the hand blocking, even if it's just mentally them blocking you. The way to get past that is through the effective use of questions, and not in an aggressive, challenging way, but in a caring, want to understand way, such as, I'm not really clear. You said that we all created the universe collectively, but then we forgot. How did we? I'm not really clear. How did we forget? If you go in there and say, "Well, that's stupid. How could we forget?" You're going to lose the person. If you ask it in an "I want to understand you" kind of way, and you and I together can find this answer kind of way, then you don't put them off. It makes them. They can deny anything you say. They cannot deny a conclusion that they come to themselves. And so, questions is the way to get through that. Like when they say it's so great, it makes everything the happiest. Then you say, sometimes it seems like you're not that happy to me. Is everything? Do you feel like it's really helping you? You're not saying you're wrong, just helping them to connect their words to reality in a questioning, caring way makes the difference.
Sure. Another question is, to what extent has Satanism influenced Scientology?
Well, L. Ron Hubbard was a Satanist for a while, and he just simply, when he was building the religion, he didn't just invent, he combined his science fiction writings. They call that in Scientology, they call that the space opera, the past civilizations. Since we've lived billions of years, we've gone through various lives on Earth and on other planets. So that's the science fiction side. That comes from his own creative writings over the years. A lot of Hinduism or Buddhism type reincarnation and those sorts of ideas that we are part of God kind of idea. Freudian psychoanalysis is part of it. And some of the religious aspects come from the influences of his time in the Church of Satan. So he blended all those things together. Yeah.
Then another question, do Scientologists accept the Bible? And how can we reach them if they don't?
Yeah, L. Ron Hubbard said he visited heaven. It was a shoddy place. And among his other things, there's so much material available. We could lecture for days and days on this stuff, but they do not accept the Bible. They don't think, they think it's just something written by men to control people, and that it has no basis in reality. It's a document. His books were documents written to control people, and he assumes all other religions are the same way. In psychology, they call it projection, where you assume someone thinks the way you think.
Sure.
Yeah.
Is the Nation of Islam origin story derived from the Scientology origin story? No.
Nation of Islam started in the 1920s in the U.S. in Detroit, whereas Scientology started in 1953 in California and New Jersey. So they were completely separate organizations. The Church of Scientology has been overwhelmingly Caucasian in the U.S. for a long time, and they were trying to broaden their allure to other people of color. And so they began to reach out to various members of Nation of Islam and get them interested. And eventually the head of the religion, Louis Farrakhan, was brought on board.
Thank you. Then I have one hello from RC Potchefstroom. Does Scientology have an international following, or is it predominantly American?
It's all over the world. It's predominantly American, but worldwide, there's probably, they claim to have in the many millions of followers, but worldwide, realistically, they have maybe 500,000 followers. So it's a very small religion, but because in the 1950s, L. Ron Hubbard came to a conclusion when he was trying to find ways to grow his religion. Traditionally, people grow their religion by knocking on doors or witnessing to people. But he didn't think that was a very efficient way to do things. And he came up with this idea, let's recruit celebrities. And celebrities will be like the light bulb that draws the moths in. And so starting, I forget the name of the program they started in the 1950s, but it was a program specifically to recruit celebrities in order to draw people in. And so they have a celebrity center in Los Angeles near Hollywood, and where they bring in celebrities and they pamper them and get, whatever food you desire, they'll find a way to get you that food fresh and right to you. They pamper them. If you're John Travolta and you want to do a auditing session at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning after you've been out partying, they'll have somebody there waiting for you. Scientologists are given a simplified version of, celebrities are given a simplified version of Scientology to make them happy and feel successful. A lot of the visualization techniques that Scientology uses in their training plays very well into how actors approach their roles and acting. And so L. Ron Hubbard had always said, he died, I think, in 1984. He had always said that actors were above everybody else when they enter Scientology because their ability to visualize and such is more advanced than the average person. So specifically, he recruited and has continued to recruit. To this day, a well-known Scientologist, directors or actors, will have free workshops for young actors to come learn techniques. And you can imagine Tom Cruise invites you to a free workshop. You're going to say yes. And then at the end of the workshop, they're going to say, I'm having a little get together at my house tonight. Would you like to come by? As an unemployed 19-year-old actor or actress, you're going to say yes. And then they're going to say, well, we're going to continue this, but we're also going to have a quick meeting over here, talk about our religion. If you're interested, you could join us here too. And eventually the acting classes and the parties and such are all part of the recruitment technique that Scientology uses to draw new artists and new actors and singers into their fold.
Sure.
Yeah, wow. You draw people in through celebrity, not through knocking on doors.
Sure. Another question that's been posted is, what do Scientologists make of the cross in their own sign?
Well, I don't. The religious aspect of the whole thing is not really. It's really downplayed in the religion. There's no regular church services per se. You're there to get training and such. The church services, they'll have some ministers wearing the Catholic priest collar and such, and wearing their little cross thingy, but they don't have any regular services. They can perform weddings and such, but they don't have any regular services. So the cross is just a symbol. It means, well, as we talked about before, it comes from a negation of the cross from the Church of Satan. but Scientologists have given a Scientology spin on that. And so they say it represents the 8 dynamics we talked about, where the first dynamic is yourself, and your family and your group and your species. And as you expand outward to the 8th dynamic, which is infinity or God. And so they say those 8 points of the cross represent the 8 dynamics. It has nothing to do with Christianity whatsoever.
Sure. Then I was just thinking, as you were speaking about the overlord. Sorry, I can't remember what the name.
Well, he sometimes called him Xenu and sometimes Xemu. So Xenu is the most common way he said it.
And how did he say that he got all this information? If this happened so long ago and all this, how did he come about all this information?
He audited himself. He went back in time. He, just as you would sit there with an auditor and they would ask questions and leave, what they do is you go into a quiet room and close your eyes and let them ask questions, and they can put you into a suggestible state. And then there's actually a book written called Have You Lived This Life Before? They don't currently advertise it, but it was written in around 1962 or so in order to demonstrate that there's been multiple lives and that you can recall your past lives. And he recalled all that information through one of his past life experiences. He discovered what the big scam of the system was. But some of the stuff in that book, Have You Lived This Life Before, just to me is comedy gold. It's very hard to take it seriously when a person's past life recollection starts off. I was a space walrus on an intergalactic spaceship. When a story starts describing yourself as a space walrus, it can't get serious after that. And I mean, you can find PDFs of you don't have to buy the book. Have You Lived This Life Before? But if you can find a PDF copy, some of it is just bizarre beyond belief. I was a robot that was destroyed while other robots were chanting God is love, and just all this weird, whatever their imagination pops up with, they would tell them is a memory from a past life. And so you get some very strange stories in there.
Sure. And then one last question, if you don't mind.
Yeah.
When you were talking about his view on Jesus, and I mean, obviously he would need to discredit Christianity, because I imagine it would be quite a big opposition to Scientology.
Yes.
So how, or maybe he doesn't even give evidence for his claims on who Jesus really was, and that he said that he's a pedophile and stuff like that. Does he give any kind of evidence for that?
No. It's his own past life memories is his evidence, and if you're in Scientology and he is the source, he is the only person who knows what's going on. Whatever he says is true, and so. If you can find some of his Philadelphia Doctorate Series lectures online and listen to them, if you've ever been around con artists or slick talkers, you just hear it. You'll hear him telling a story and he'll pause and he'll laugh for a couple of seconds. And you know what he's doing. He's trying to think of what he's going to say next. You'll hear him say something like, and then the Space Ranger came in and, and then he said to the man, that laugh is to pause to think of what am I going to say next in this story I'm making up on the spot. And so he recounts stories of these implant stations on Mars, and the 4th battalion showed up when the 3rd group from the previous civilization was still there, and the mayhem that ensued, and he'll laugh about his stories, and you just listen and you go, this is just pure nonsense. But if you think that he has the secrets to life and eternity, you take him seriously. Like when he says truth is relative to truth. I mean, that's a meaningless statement. But if you think he knows something, you say, I can't understand it, but the great mind of L. Ron Hubbard can understand it.
Well, thank you, Don, so much for your time. We really appreciate you being with us tonight and for your presentation. And just may the Lord bless you in your ministry and in your studies. Hope your doctorate goes well going forward. And yeah, we'll continue to pray for you and your ministry. And thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Well, Jonathan, thank you for having me on, and I pray great success for Ratio Christi too. I think that's a vital ministry, not just in South Africa, but in the whole world. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. And thanks to all the listeners out there. We appreciate you tuning in, and thank you for the questions. And don't forget to tune in for our event next week. Take care. Good night.